I'm going to record this.
You're talking plastic surgery, right?
Back to the show here. So again, not really going to focus on anything hardcore to take your body through an aesthetic transformation. So what the heck am I doing here? My company's Fitness Science, our approach to this topic is quite a bit different. I'll tell you right off the bat. Thank you for using the chat to communicate any questions you might have. I've got the chat right up in front of me, so if you pop anything in there, thanks, Andrea, for iterating that again. I will get to it. So again, our approach is much different. We're not an aesthetic based fitness consulting company, unlike many that are out there, especially in a world where fitness is often defined by a social media picture with, you know, somebody's state of being unclothed, and sometimes even featuring one particular body part. That's not us. Our approach is one of function over aesthetics. So when it comes to this topic, we aspire to three tenets, basically. One is fitness is what your body can do, not what it looks like. So if you've ever read the blog post that we have on our website, fitness is performance, then that speaks to this topic in quite a bit of detail. But suffice it to say that we are about what your body's capable of, how it can function, and not so much breaking down your body by parts and trying to work on individual parts. Second tenet with respect to this topic is the human form is at its most beautiful when it's performing through movement. So no matter what form your body takes, and a lot of really, really fit people take very, very different forms, we believe that it's most beautiful when it's moving the way it was meant to move. So whether that's running through a field, or participating in a fitness class, or, you know, playing with your kids, or just enjoying a hike, or any form of physical endeavor, whatever you enjoy doing, that's when your form is it's most beautiful. And the third tenet with respect to this topic, there's a really wide variety of human forms that can exemplify our beauty through movement. And I want you to just maybe visualize a few sort of non-conformist beautiful human forms. If you think about, you know, a lineman in football, there, if you saw them walking down the street, you might not think those individuals scream fitness, but if you weigh 300 pounds and you can run 40 yards in under 5 seconds, hard to tell that person they're not fit. You know, there's all kinds of athletes, and you would probably have them as your greatest examples of human beauty through movement. And athletes don't always look like pageant fitness people, or pageant so-called fitness people, or bodybuilders. Oftentimes they have functional morphological structure that is suited to their movement. So regardless of what type of movement you're doing, or what form your body takes, think about a hammer thrower. You know, I used to do track and field, and I knew at least 3 hammer throwers two of which were women, all of which could throw me out of the stadium if I had anything to say about their fitness, which I didn't because I saw them train and I knew what they went through and how they got to be able to perform the way they did. And it's nothing to be scoffed at. So regardless of the activity that you enjoy or that you choose, these are just shots of us working with some of our clients in different disciplines, different movement patterns. But regardless of what you do to move, what you enjoy doing to move, it can be a thing of beauty no matter what form you take. So you want to beach body fast. I would contend that you already have a body. Now just go to the beach. Problem solved. That's not the end of the lecture. It's not the end of the talk, but that is how we approach things. So I'm just moving things around so I can see my own slides here. So what is our mission with respect to our clients, if not to change them aesthetically? I've already touched on performance, so we aim to improve a person's ability to accomplish anything in life, whether those tasks, actions, or functions are physical or practically physical or physical from a sport perspective, or whether it's just trying to perform better in life, both physically, cognitively, spiritually, emotionally. All those things are interconnected to our fitness, our wellness, and our health. On the topic of health, we also aim to improve your healthy lifespan, otherwise coined as health span. So that is the time period during your life that you define as being free from any serious or debilitating illness or injury. So it's the time in your life during which you can perform everything you want to perform at a level you want to perform it at. So allowing people to continue to strive to improve their performance while maintaining continuity with health. And that might seem like it's an absolute connection, and it mostly is. But there are things you can do to improve your performance, as most people know, that will probably debilitate from your health. Like taking performance-enhancing drugs might have a short-term gain, but we know that there's a lot of negative side effects that they may have. Further to that, if you're not training properly, you can actually cause a health deterioration. So if you're overtraining or just doing way too much without optimal recovery, that can have a debilitating effect on your health. So too much can be just as much of a problem as not enough. So the general principle of training that we subscribe to, and actually the general or the number one training principle that all trainers should subscribe to, is a training effect or causing your fitness to go from point X to point Y up here is a matter of stressing the system, which is actually going to knock your fitness down a peg, and then having your system recover and then supercompensate. And that supercompensation is a training effect. So there's two parts to that equation: the stress or the training stimulus and the recovery. So how do we approach those things? So with training, I've already mentioned we don't break down the body by parts. We train functional movements rather than isolating muscles and muscle groups, because that's the way our body moves in real life. And it's the most effective way to improve performance, which is our goal. So what do I mean when I say functional movements? So that would be moving the body the way it was meant to move. So things like squatting, lunging, pushing, pulling with your upper limbs, rotating patterns. So that would be like a chop pattern or a paddling pattern. A swinging pattern would be a rotational pattern as well. any motility function. So a climbing movement pattern, crawling, walking, of course, running, of course, would probably include other sort of machine-driven motility functions like cycling and rowing, those types of things I would put in that mix as well. But all of those types of movements are the ones that we use rather than isolating a particular body part. So single joint muscular isolation is not really what we're going to use because our body doesn't typically work that way. Even if you're working a rotational pattern, try to do a demo in a small screen here, but pretend that's a tennis racket swing, for example. And if you're working from a bodybuilding premise, you might think, okay, if I do chest flies, that's going to improve my ability to swing that tennis racket. And that may very well be the case, but oftentimes when you're working one group in isolation, you're typically not stabilized the way you would be when you're moving in the real world. So you might be in some kind of an awkward stance, which does require you to stabilize, but you also might be using a pad to stabilize your body in one plane while you're moving in another. And while that might generate a lot of local failure to one particular group, it's not how your body generates force for that movement in the real world. So that kind of specificity where you're actually stabilizing in one plane while moving in another for strength movements is pretty important to gain functional most efficiently. Also, we're big on, just to continue with how we train people, we're big on time efficiency because we all live in pretty time scarce worlds. We're working meeting to meeting, minute to minute. We could stay busy 24 hours a day if it was humanly possible to do so, for most of us anyway. So finding time to train is not easy. So we like to create workouts that are really time efficient. So whereas you could go out and get some cardiorespiratory benefit by doing a longer continuous aerobic session, you might get similar benefit plus other benefits from a strength, power, and anaerobic fitness perspective with an interval workout where you're working at a higher intensity for a period of time and then interspersing periods of incomplete recovery. That incomplete recovery is what results in a shorter workout because you can't keep working at high intensity forever. You've probably all heard of HIIT, high intensity interval training. We subscribe to using that type of training, but we like to recreate the acronym using the word progressive instead of high as the first word. So progressive intensity interval training. So what does that mean? That means whereas you may ultimately get fitter and be able to work at an 8 or a 9 out of 10 for a work interval for any given workout. If you've never done that type of training, you may want to start it at a 6 or a 7 just to try to get familiar with the process, build your intensity gradually, and do what you can manage, do what you can handle. And in all of my years of training, I've never seen somebody not push themselves hard enough. Typically, it's the other way around. I've got to pull in the reins to try to back them down a little bit. So I'm never really worried about somebody working hard enough. If you tell them they need to work fairly hard or hard for a particular work interval, they generally do so. And sometimes it's beyond what their capacity is, especially the first few times. So that's why I like to have people moderate things in the early stages of doing progressive intensity interval training. So that, in a nutshell, is how we recommend training people. The only other thing I would say is, on a day-to-day basis, change the pattern that you use. So if on day one you use a push pattern, so a push pattern that's perpendicular to your body, like a push-up, for example, and a squat pattern, as well, and you're pairing those two back to back with incomplete recovery between in like a mini circuit. The next day, day two, you'd want to use two different patterns. So you might want to use a running pattern and throw some pull-ups in the mix. Or running and rowing would be two sort of motility function things that would have those two movement patterns represented. A row is basically a deadlift pattern with an upper limb pull on a rowing machine, that is. And running could be running flat, running on a hill, any way you're able to integrate running into a workout. These are just examples. The third day, you want to try something completely different, maybe a rotation pattern with some lunging, but keeping it simple, picking a couple of movements, having focus and having intensity in your workouts are the primary guidelines that we subscribe to. Now, I also talked about the recovery process, and that is everything outside of the training stimulus. And in general, we focus on all facets of your life, from stress management to nutrition, to hydration, to sleep, supplementation if that's relevant. All those things that will give you the best possible conditions to maximize recovery, minimize chronic systemic inflammation. So that would be the process by which your body has it's a biological response where your body has some kind of stimulus introduced that causes damage, which a training stimulus is. But it also includes everything that heals you from that damage. And in the instance where your body is unable to keep up with the healing required from the damage that is caused, that would be chronic systemic inflammation. And that can be caused by a number of environmental factors, including how we navigate our food supply. And in fact, that's a big part of it. But there's other things as well. And pardon me, we like to address all of those things. So generally, we have an integrated approach to help you improve your performance and feel better, live better. Like I said, live all aspects of your life better. And that in and of itself, with body form awareness aside, generally gives people the confidence they need to get out in the world and do things. So forget about conforming to any kind of notion of what your body needs to look like to be out and enjoying life on the beach or anywhere else. We know that if you move more and you take care of yourself, if you commit to self-care, you just feel better. You feel well enough, and you feel like you can take on the world a lot more so than before. So about all those methods that I just touched on, coincidentally, they can also result, if they're adhered to quite strictly, in rapid changes in lean body mass ratio, which is really what people are talking about when they come to us with an aesthetic, typically an aesthetic goal, if you will. First thing we try to do is redirect their perspective, which is what I just tried to do for you. But bear in mind that those changes, and I'm going to touch on some specific methods that we use beyond the exercise to help people improve their health and optimize their recovery. Excuse me. those methods can cause drastic changes in body composition. And in fact, when people implement them, beyond gaining the performance, the confidence, the feeling much more like a superhero. We've heard these kinds of testimonies before. Beyond that, the package that your body changes into typically is reflective of the performance that you're training for. So if you're doing a lot more strength training, you're probably going to notice more morphological changes. If you're doing more endurance training, you might just get lighter and find like you need to eat more pies. There's one check for endurance training maybe. But no one form is better than the next. They're just different. And to subscribe to one particular ideal is a mistake. And it can be a big problem for people and cause a lot of stress for folks. So what kinds of things can you do to cause this rapid transformation in health, in performance, and yes, likely in body composition? Just moving something on my screen a little bit here. Bear with me.
Yeah.
First things first, eliminate the crap. And everybody knows this, but it actually has eliminating the stuff that is doing your body harm. So what I mean by that are anti-nutrients in our food supply that drive both insulin, which is our energy storing hormone. It's a really important hormone. But most of us, if we feel like our body comp is out of whack, are probably producing a little bit too much of it for a few different reasons. And being over-insulinized or hyperinsulinemic is a pro-inflammatory state. But beyond that, there's other anti-nutrients in our food supply that can contribute to an inflammatory state as well. So what do I mean when I say eliminate the crap? Again, most people know this, but starches, so refined carbs, grains, cereals, white potatoes, processed corn, processed soy, anything processed in general is not particularly something our body was intended to eat. Dairy, for the most part, is also, there's not a lot of sugar in dairy, but we know that it's got a high insulinemic index, as high. So skim milk has an insulinemic index, so drives insulin as much as white flour, or nearly as much. So starches in dairy drive insulin directly. Sugars and alcohol are basically liver toxins. They're dose-specific hepatotoxins. Most of us are aware that that's the case with alcohol. But fructose, which is what makes things sweet, whether it takes the form of table sugar, or table sugar is actually half glucose, half fructose. So you get the best of both worlds there. Drives insulin, and it's a hepatotoxin. But agave syrup, honey, anything calorically sweet. Further to that, a lot of non-caloric sweeteners are also detrimental to our health from a perspective of insulin resistance. So those specific hepatotoxicity caused by sugar and alcohol, or fructose and alcohol, causes a lot of problems. Accumulation of fat around the liver, increased uric acid levels, But from the perspective of insulin, it increases our insulin resistance or decreases insulin sensitivity. So our cells don't see that the insulin is being produced, so the pancreas just keeps pumping it out. So according to some progressive doctors and scientists, the fructose and alcohol in our diet is more problematic even than the starches and dairy in our diet from the perspective of driving insulin. If you really want to make a change, a more drastic change, then you want to try to minimize or eliminate both of those things, all of those things, if possible. Also falling into the category of anything processed would be processed anything. So meats, anything that comes in a package. Sometimes they can be fairly pure and straight out of nature if it's a frozen good, but oftentimes it's preserved somehow to stay on the shelf longer. So read labels. If you don't know something that's on the label, then don't put it in your mouth. It's just a good general rule to follow. So that's what to get out of your intake. What you want to elevate in your intake is real food intended for human beings. So this might sound like a pretty sort of paleo-esque statement to make, and I guess in a sense it is, but my take on paleo is not necessarily the same as a lot of folks who contend they are eating paleo. I'm pretty sure bacon was not around when we were evolving as a species. Smoked and cured meats are a class 1 carcinogen. So maybe steer away from those. That said, we are great apes. So we evolved eating dicotyl leaves and expanded our diet as we evolved further. But when we evolved to Homo sapiens, we are pretty much predominating our intake with vegetation. And we know this because if you examine, not if you examine, but if when scientists examine Paleolithic stool samples, they know that we had an intake of between 150 grams and 300 grams a day of fiber. That is a lot of roughage. To give you a frame of reference, most North Americans on our standard American diet, acronym SAD, which it is for the most part, get about 4 grams of fiber. So not even close. So in order to predominate your intake, or in order to get that much fiber, an optimal amount, the amount that evolved our genome, you need to predominate with vegetables as much as possible. And so your mom was right. Healthy fats we know are not, or fats in general are not the demon. We once thought they were in health and medical circles. There are certain types of fats that are problematic. Those would be trans fats, so modified fats that are modified from liquid to solid, either by chemical or mechanical means. Fats that are extracted with chemical means, so most non-cold pressed, highly commercial derived fats, even from vegetable sources, corn oil, soybean oil, canola oil, peanut oil, none of those are particularly great. And omega-6 fats are fairly abundant in the standard American diet. Those would be the fats that come more from grain sources. And for the same reason that we have a lot of refined carbohydrates in our diet, we also have a lot of omega-6s in our diet. And a lot of the animals that we eat are fed the same things as we're trying to avoid in that first slide. So they will be abundant in omega-6 fats. So if you're stuck eating some kind of animal protein that's not particularly high quality, make it as lean as possible. If you're eating a piece of animal protein that is, say, wild fish or wild game, if you can find that, pastured poultry, not necessarily just organic, but pastured means that chicken was, in BC, it would be called an SPCA certified chicken, or egg, for that matter, would be in the same category. And it means that chickens are actually running around eating what chickens are supposed to eat, rather than being grain fed, which is what humans feed them to fatten them up more quickly. So we want to predominate with vegetables. We want to predominate with healthy fats. So what would be the healthier fat sources? From a whole food perspective, we're looking at, if you're looking at, I already mentioned some animal sources of healthy fats, but from a vegetable perspective, avocados, raw nuts, some raw seeds, flax seeds, and hemp seeds in particular have very few anti-nutrients. Avocado would be a fruit that is high in fat. Olives would be another one that is really high in fat. So those are all excellent whole food sources of fat. Derived sources of fat that would be most optimal, or the ones that I use anyway, would be avocado oil for high heat cooking, coconut oil for high heat cooking. Olive oil is great. You can use it for cooking, but it's also awesome raw on a salad, as most of us know. Perilla oil is fantastic. Macadamia nut oil tastes like butter. It's quite expensive, but it's really, really good. If you're going to eat a rendered animal fat or a dairy fat, like a grass-fed butter, so again, you want to strive for grass-fed for the same reasons that you're striving for higher quality protein. You want to do the same thing with your fats. Now, there is another anti-nutrient in dairy. Casein A1 is a mutated form of casein in the Holstein breed of cattle. Now, if you really wanted to get strict with your intake, not necessarily from a metabolic or body composition shift perspective, but from a health perspective, and so therefore possibly it could have an impact on your body comp. But casein A1 is found in all North American cow dairy. It's found in the Holstein breed of cattle, in which about 2,000 years ago there was a mutation from casein A2 to casein A1 in the casein in the dairy. Now, if you want to take it a step further and not take in that casein in your butter, then you can use clarified butter, which is ghee. So if you find organic clarified butter, then made from grass-fed dairy, I know it sounds like a long list to look for on a label, but it exists. That would be your best option as far as that goes. Also, so moderating quality protein, talked about that. That doesn't necessarily have to be an animal source. If you are a vegetarian or a vegan, you can do really well eating vegetables that are higher in protein. So that would include mushrooms and fungi. They're super high. Already talked about raw nuts and certain seeds. There are a number of grains that are higher in protein, but try to, if you're trying to make a shift from a higher insulin intake to a lower insulin, you want to be pretty cautious about that. So sticking to mushrooms, fungi, nuts, and beans and lentils are also super high in protein, but again, I'll qualify that. You maybe want to try to, from a gut health perspective, steer into beans and lentils that are pressure cooked. The reason is not everybody has, just got a question pop up here, which I'll get to, Andre, thank you. Not everybody has the ability to process lentils and beans as well as the next person. And that's because there are carbohydrate binding proteins in them that we've only really had about, sounds like a long time, but 10,000 years for our guts to adapt to. Beyond that, our guts are dealing with a lot of other stressors from our North American diet, so that further disables our ability to manage certain carbohydrate binding proteins. If you pressure cook those beans and lentils, it knocks those proteins out of the bean or lentil. Now, beans and lentils are a little bit starchy. They can provide you with some caloric heft that you may be missing if you cut out grains. But I would advise you to try to eat them pressure cooked if possible, and keep the quantity somewhere between half a cup and a cup cooked. That can take up the resistant starch component, which is the fourth bullet there as far as what you should pull from the food supply. Or you could also eat resistant starches from tubers. So tubers would include most root vegetables except potatoes. So rutabagas, turnips, sweet potatoes, yams, all of those kinds of things. You want to have a moderate amount of those in every eating session if possible. What is a resistant starch compared to a starch, which is in the previous slide? Resistant starch is a starch that can feed your gut microbiome, pardon me, as well as it feeds you. And all of those things that I just listed, including a number of vegetables, so mushrooms would be in that category, onions would be in that category, have starches in them that feed your good gut bugs, which are in turn responsible for taking care of your health. But this type of diet would basically be an anti-inflammatory diet and help you with everything from performance to optimizing your body composition to that performance. Getting to eating timing in a short bit here, Andre, and I'll talk about prospective fasting protocols there as well. Hydration. Since we're talking about summertime stuff, being at the beach, hydration is a fairly important thing. It's important all year round, but drinking water in high frequency and volume is something that we know can enhance everything. How much is enough? 2 to 3 liters per day. So if you're a smaller person and not particularly active, somewhere around 2. If your activity and/or size tends up through the spectrum, you may want to get closer to 3. How do you get that much water in a day? And that is, it does seem like a lot, especially some people only have 1 or 2 cups a day, which is only 500 milliliters to a liter. If you wake up in the morning and start your day with a half a liter to a liter of water, first of all, you might find you don't need quite as much coffee to kickstart your life in the morning. And that water could be hot water as well as cold, but coffee's not going to do it because it's actually a diuretic and will dehydrate as much as the liquid in there hydrates probably. So start your day with a big glass of water, and then through the day, like every half hour or so, or maybe even more frequently, depending on the heat and your activity level, drink a quantity of about 120 mils, so about a half a cup of water at a time. You could sprinkle in some sea salt to give yourself some electrolyte replacement. If you really want to go hard on that front, you could do a quarter teaspoon in 500 mils of cream of tartar, which gives you a good quantity of potassium. You wouldn't want to do that every single time, but for 1 or 2 per day, 500 milliliter quantities. You could add that in for the potassium side of things. You're going to get sodium and other minerals from the sea salt, unless you salt your food with sea salt enough already, in which case probably don't need to do that. So eat big early is the next sort of guideline that I recommend for most clients. And there's a lot of discussion on this topic these days in the world of health and fitness. But what I've found works the best for making change, enhancing performance, reducing systemic inflammation, is eating big early and eating small late, and stopping 3 to 4 hours before bed. Talked about insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance earlier when we were talking about alcohol and fructose. Our body's insulin sensitivity is at its highest in the morning. So we're most able to metabolize glucose or anything for that matter in the morning hours. Now, if you already eat late and wake up in the morning feeling full still, then making this shift is not as easy. So if you stop eating 3 to 4 hours before bed, say you go to bed at 10, that would mean stopping eating at 6. And then you eat breakfast, say at 8 o'clock. That is a 14-hour fasting window that you're putting your body through. So arguably, you could classify that as time-restricted eating. And in fact, the scientist who has done the most work on time-restricted eating at the Salk Institute in San Diego, Sachin Panda, puts that range. Actually, he in fact expands it all the way to 12 hours and indicates that as long as 16 hours of fasting could provide optimal health benefits. What I've found with my clients is eating a big breakfast early. If you don't train in the morning, then right out of the gate within an hour of waking. Or if you train first thing in the morning, then pretty much immediately after that, if possible. It gives the best results for just about all parameters. And then stopping eating 3 to 4 hours before bed, because that's when we are most insulin resistant. And there's a mechanism for that. In fact, that's a fairly recent discovery. There are receptors in your pancreas, in the islets of Langerhans, for melatonin. So melatonin is our sleep hormone. So it starts to be produced in the late afternoon hours, often when most of us are eating our largest meal. So if that's the case, what those receptors do when they bind with melatonin is block insulin production and therefore impair glucose management. So we're basically at our worst for eating a large meal when many of us are eating our largest meal. So Andre has asked a question here. Is there an ideal range for intermittent fasting in terms of performance maintenance and improvement? For example, 14 hours versus 16 hours of fasting per day. I'm assuming that's what you mean. 2 versus 3 times a week. I would try to get into a routine that is daily, and something you can maintain daily. There are schools of thought for intermittent fasting, but I would reserve fasting in its true state which I would define as not eating for 48 plus hours. I would reserve that for a seasonal um, event, which has all kinds of other benefits, including, autophagy, apoptosis. It gives your gut even more of a rest. And try to subscribe to a daily pattern that works well for you, that puts a fasting period in your daily regime. So when I say fasting, it's not, you're not actually achieving a fully fasted state. You're not, burning a tremendous amount of ketones. Your gut's getting some rest, but not complete. And you're really not trying to restrict calories. That's kind of where the line might be drawn between time restricted eating and intermittent fasting. Is one is intended to create some kind of a caloric deficit. One is not. And especially if you're training for endurance performance, you don't want to have too small of an eating window. So to answer your question more specifically, Andre, I would go with somewhere between a 9 and a 10-hour window for eating. And so that would translate to a 14 to 15-hour window for fasting, if that works. But I would hesitate from anything smaller than that, especially when you're training for endurance performance. I don't have any athletes on anything smaller than a 9-hour eating window. They just need the gas. They need the fuel. So it's a big topic, and moving on here. Maximize quality sleep. So I was actually looking for a slide photo with my daughter and my son when he was an infant, both sleeping in the same position. It's kind of like this, or something like that. But they both have their arm identically over their head. It's very cute, but I just couldn't find it. So this is my dog. She's cute too. But maximizing sleep quality is crucial to optimal recovery. It might seem like a obvious statement, but because, again, we live in this time-scarce world and we are all super busy people, and we can remain that way perpetually, sleep becomes an issue. The other problems beyond just not being able to carve out the time to sleep, which is one thing you must do, got a question about caffeine, which I'll answer, and that's a good question, Robert. The regulars with the good questions. Thank you very much. 10 hours before waking, start a bedtime ritual. So what does that mean? So minimize bright lights. So go through your house if you can and turn off half of the overhead lights 2 hours before you want to be asleep. So 10 hours before you want to be awake. 8 hours is kind of in the realm of time that you need to be in the rack going through sleep cycles. And you want to maximize quality. So you want to have every phase well represented. Excuse me, well represented. Deep sleep, REM sleeps, or rapid eye movement sleep, where we dream and form memories. Deep sleep is very, very restorative and very crucial. It's an early part of our sleep cycle. We go to bed too late, unless we are a genetic night owl, which can exist. There's starlings and night owls, according to sleep expert Matthew Walker. But to get back to the light situation, you want to try to cut off blue light or minimize it as much as possible, starting 1 hour before bed. So that means the screens. These screens, computer screens, television screens, any screen. You want to try to get that blue light out of your life, because it keeps cortisol, your awake hormone, turned on and does not allow melatonin to come into the picture, which we've already discussed is what we need to fall asleep at night. So you can do that by getting away from the screen. You can do that by using filters to some extent. You can do that by wearing blue light blocking glasses to some extent, but generally it's best to just cut out the screen if possible. In the event that you can't, try to find a filter for your computer. It's one called Flux, I believe. If you do wear blue light blocking glasses for the purpose of enhancing your sleep, you're going to want to get a set of red lenses. Red lenses are going to generally, not all red lenses, but a good quality set of red lenses is going to block out the green and blue spectrums more completely. And that's what you need to enhance your sleep quality. You want your sleeping environment to be dark. When I say dark, you should be able to hold your hand 18 inches from your face and not see it. If you can still see it, then you need to get your room darker if possible, which is a problem for some people who don't have blackout blinds in the summertime. Cool is another thing that's important for most people to lower their body's core temperature and enable sleep. That's a physiological mechanism that we are aware of. And that temperature is individual, unfortunately, for some couples. It's not the same for everybody. Some people require a slightly warmer temperature. Some people require quite a cool temperature to fall asleep, or to get into deep sleep in particular. Do not sedate with alcohol. Sedation is not the same as sleep. They're two different states. So even though you're unconscious, many have experienced this. When you sober up, you might wake up at 1 or 2 in the morning. And your sleep quality, I can assure you, will not have been very good. So immediately before bed, those are the kinds of things you want to try. There's an article, a blog article on our website. I think it's called Elite Sleep, Maximizing This Precious Commodity, or something to that effect. I wrote it, I should know the title, but anyway. It's got a lot more detail in it than what I'm giving you here today, so check that out. THC, being that it's legal, I can talk about it, also can have a detrimental effect on sleep phases. We know that it has an impact on deep sleep and REM sleep as well. Before getting to your bedtime, Robert will answer your question here. Set yourself up for success with sleep. And the best way to do that is in the AM hours, or one of the best ways to do that is in the AM hours. First of all, get outside, get into some sunlight. Even on a cloudy day, you're getting 10,000 plus lux, which is a unit of brightness from sunlight, even in vampire world that we live in here. And try to get some exposure to that, both your face and body as much as possible from a thermoregulation standpoint. You don't want to freeze yourself, obviously. And caffeine. Robert's asked a question about decaffeinated coffee, and yes, decaf is much, much better. It's got a really low relative level of caffeine in it. If you're going to drink decaf, try to find a Swiss water processed bean rather than a chemically processed decaffeinated bean. Why do you want to stop coffee at least 12 hours before bed? So that means if you're going to bed at 10, you want to have no coffee after 10. And honestly, you should probably stop a little earlier than that, because caffeine has a quarter life of 12 hours. So 12 hours after drinking that cup of coffee, you still have a quarter cup of coffee worth of caffeine in your system. Caffeine pushes cortisol, inhibits melatonin, and therefore makes it harder to fall asleep and have good quality sleep. Those are, in a nutshell, all of the recovery or optimal recovery parameters that we touch on for people. If you take them all to as extreme a level as possible, I promise you, you will have a transformation both in performance and what your human form looks like in a week, and more so in 2 weeks, and more so in 1 month. And the longer you go, the less hard it becomes. Suffice it to say that none of this stuff is easy, because our lives are not often set up for it, and we're dependent on or addicted to certain processes or certain behaviors that are not optimal. Thanks for coming, Robert. I'm almost done. I'm just pitching now. So you are all, as Ritchie Brothers staff, group fitness members. So you all have access to our group fitness program. If you have questions about how to get into them, then shoot me an email to jason@fitnessscience.ca, and we'll make sure you get set up with that. But in addition to that, if you want more personal attention, if you want a little bit more individualized help, you can get a big discount. So that's 20% off of our regular $89 per hour, which is a fairly competitive rate, personal training rate. And email info@fitnessscience.ca, and we can direct you to a personal trainer to help you with all those things that I just talked about. All of our trainers and health coaches are fantastic. Thank you for coming. Those who have to depart, I'm basically done, but semi-private training is another option. If you and your spouse want to get together and do something, it works out to $108 an hour, which again is a 20% discounted rate for anybody who's a group member, which is anybody at Ritchie Brothers. Thanks, Lily. Thanks for coming. Jocelyn, my pleasure. Good to see, or good to not see you, but good to have you. And again, there's our contact information. That HQ address is by appointment. Thank you very much, Allison. And the phone numbers there are, you can reach us anywhere in the world toll free, or you can drop us an email to info@fitnessscience.ca. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to unplug my mic and go to the device mic. If anybody wants to speak up and ask questions, I will take them verbally too, unless you want to put them in the chat. Unmute my speaker, increase my volume. Bear with me for a moment here. Sorry, I'm a technological monkey. Okay, I should be able to hear anybody if anybody wants to speak up and ask a question. They can unmute and do so. No? Nothing. That's okay. You can also email any questions you might have if you don't want to chat about it here. That's fine. Great to see you, Andrea. Great to have all of you attending. And you guys all have a great week.